Imagine you are the pilot of the world's most secret aircraft. You fly in full confidence that no one sees you. You are, the absolute peak of technology, just gliding unseen through the night sky, untouchable.
Right.
And suddenly, completely without warning, 2 missiles streak out of the clouds right at you.
Wow.
Your plane is struck, it's spiraling downwards, and you parachute into enemy territory. Deep behind enemy lines, hostile forces all around. The night is dark, cold, and, well, frankly, utterly terrifying.
I can only imagine.
Now, fast forward years later. Imagine you were sitting at the same table with the very person who pressed the button. The one who sent those missiles, the person who tried to kill you.
Okay.
And you're not adversaries anymore. You're drinking coffee with him, laughing like a best friend.
That sounds impossible, really.
It really does, doesn't it? Yet, in this deep dive, we are going to tell you the extraordinary true story of how exactly this happened.
Okay, I'm hooked already.
We're taking you back to the night of March 27th, 1999. It was the 4th night of NATO's Operation Allied Force over Yugoslavia. And this was the night a legend fell.
A big one.
The night the F-117 Nighthawk, America's silver bullet, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, was shot down. I mean, for years leading up to this, the F-117 was just the definition of invincibility.
Absolutely. Its reputation was forged, wasn't it, back in Desert Storm, over Iraq in '91.
Exactly. These revolutionary machines, they struck Baghdad's most heavily protected targets, flew through, some of the densest air defense networks on Earth, delivering these precision strikes with what seemed like absolute impunity.
And I never lost one in Iraq, did they?
Not a single one. It was considered untouchable, this amazing engineering marvel that just made traditional air defenses look, well, obsolete. But on that fateful night over Yugoslavia, the myth was shattered. And what makes this story so compelling, I think, is that it's far more than just some lucky shot in the dark.
Oh, definitely not just luck. There's so much more to it.
It's this complex, multi-layered story, isn't it? Ingenious tactical thinking, unexpected vulnerabilities, critical mistakes on the operational side, and even the basic physics of radar and stealth.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm of factors.
It really is. It's a true David against Goliath tale, in a way. You have this seemingly outdated technology, applied with incredible cunning and discipline, bringing down what everyone thought was the absolute pinnacle of cutting-edge design.
And, this single event didn't just down a plane. It fundamentally challenged the whole doctrine of stealth. It forced military strategists everywhere to completely rethink invulnerability.
Right. The ripples went far beyond just that one night.
Oh, absolutely. It sent shockwaves through defense circles globally, questioning everything, from aircraft design to how you plan operations. So today, we're not just recounting the facts of what happened.
No, we're going deeper.
Exactly. We're diving into the technological chess match that played out that night, the really profound human drama that people on both sides experienced, and the utterly unexpected, almost unbelievable conclusion to this whole story.
It's that ending. It's something else.
It really is. Our mission here in this deep dive is to dissect that intricate chain of events. We want to explore the motivations, the ingenuity of the people involved, break down the science behind it all, and really analyze the profound aftermath.
We want to give you insights that go way beyond the headlines, right? Looking at the critical decisions, those moments of tension, the foresight, and ultimately this remarkable story of reconciliation that just transcends the battlefield.
Precisely. So let's get into it. Let's unpack this incredible tale.
Okay, so at the heart of this whole thing, this dramatic confrontation, you have 2 men, 2 highly skilled officers, and their destinies just converged in the skies over Serbia in a way neither of them could possibly have imagined.
And their personal stories are really the thread that weaves through all the tactics of the tech, aren't they?
Absolutely. So first, let's talk about the pilot. The American aviator caught in the crosshairs that night. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko.
Right, Dale Zelko. And he wasn't a rookie, was he? He had combat experience.
Exactly. Experienced U.S. Air Force pilot, a combat veteran from Desert Storm back in '91. So, he was far from a novice when it came to flying dangerous missions over hostile territory.
And it's crucial, I think, to understand Zelko's state of mind as he was getting ready for that specific mission. His aircraft, the F-117A, had the serial number 820806.
And a pretty famous name, didn't it? Painted right on the fuselage.
Yeah, famously, almost ominously named Something Wicked. Like straight out of Shakespeare's Macbeth, something wicked this way comes.
Wow. That's evocative.
It really is. And this specific jet, it had a serious combat history itself. It flew something like 39 combat sorties during Desert Storm. So it had proven its reputation time and again.
So a veteran pilot in a veteran aircraft, and his call sign for this mission was Vega 31.
That's right, Vega 31. And interestingly, there was a bit of confusion early on because the name of another pilot, Captain Ken Visa Dwell, was also written on the canopy. So the press initially got the pilot's identity mixed up.
Ah, okay.
But the real human drama of that night, from Zelko anyway, is underscored by his own, well, chilling premonition of disaster. He actually recounted later, and this is a direct quote from him, "I had a deep feeling and sense that if any night was especially ripe for my plane to be shot down, that was the night."
He actually said that. He felt it coming.
He did. It wasn't just a fleeting thought, apparently. It was this profound kind of oppressive feeling that settled on him as he prepared.
And the conditions didn't help, I imagine.
No, not at all. That sense of unease was really exacerbated by the conditions. The weather was particularly bad, lots of thick, obscuring cloud cover. But even more critically, you had the absence of vital support aircraft.
The EA-6B Prowlers, right? The electronic warfare planes.
Exactly. Those specialized electronic warfare aircraft. Their job is to jam enemy radars, and they typically accompany strike packages, precisely to provide that crucial electronic protection.
And they weren't there that night.
They weren't flying because of the bad weather, so their absence basically left Zelko's F-117, well, naked, as it were, vulnerable. It created this uniquely tense, isolated atmosphere for him.
Just him up there, essentially unprotected from radar.
Yeah, it was this pervasive feeling that something was profoundly off about this mission. You can only imagine the weight of carrying that kind of premonition as you take off into a dark, stormy night like that.
So while Lieutenant Colonel Zelko is up there with this chilling feeling, his adversary on the ground, Colonel Zoltán Dani, he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, I believe.
That's right, yeah. Lieutenant Colonel then.
He wasn't just sitting there waiting. He was executing a meticulously planned operation. He was the commander of the 3rd Division of the 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade of Yugoslavia.
And the descriptions you read of him are fascinating. Not just a competent commander, but highly motivated, incredibly inventive, not just reactive, you know.
Yeah, proactive, anticipating, adapting, a strategist.
Absolutely. And if you zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. Dani wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was a real intellectual when it came to warfare, a deep thinker, constantly looking to learn and evolve.
He studied Western tactics, didn't he?
Meticulously. He paid particular attention to that devastating Israeli suppression of Syrian air defenses back in '82 in the Bekaa Valley.
What did he learn from that?
From that, he extracted a really crucial lesson. In modern warfare, especially when you're up against an enemy with overwhelming air superiority, mobility is the absolute key to survival for your air defense units. Static defenses, they're just targets waiting to be hit.
Makes sense. Stand still, get found, get destroyed.
Precisely. But what really set him apart, I think, was his foresight regarding stealth technology. Even before the conflict really kicked off, he'd analyzed the concept and came to this conclusion that really went against the grain at the time.
Which was?
He basically understood that, quote, invisible planes do not exist. There are only less visible ones.
That's quite insightful, especially back then when the myth of invisibility was so strong.
It really was. It wasn't just a casual thought. It showed a deep understanding of the physics involved, the inherent limitations of stealth. It revealed this critical adaptive mindset that, frankly, not many others seem to possess.
And what was he working with? What was his unit's equipment?
Well, that's the kicker. His unit's main weapon was the Soviet-made S-125 Neva missile system. NATO called it the SA-3 Goa.
That's an old system, isn't it? Like 1960s tech?
Exactly. Originally designed in the late 50s, deployed in the 60s, considered completely outdated by NATO, a whole generation behind the F-117, and that stark technological gap, that's the central paradox of this whole story.
How could this old system possibly bring down a technological marvel like the Nighthawk?
That's the million-dollar question we're digging into. And just as a little aside, hinting at the sort of unbelievable human outcome later on, after the war, Zoltán Dani retired from the military, and guess what he did?
What?
He became a baker, runs a small family bakery.
No way, from missile commander to baker.
Yep, a poignant, almost unbelievable contrast to his role that night.
So let's be clear. The destruction of Vega 31 Zelko's plane, it wasn't some random fluke, not a lucky shot in the dark.
No, absolutely not. It was the result of a very carefully planned ambush.
Right, this incredible blend of ingenious Serbian tactics, applied under immense pressure, but also coupled with a cascade of critical errors on NATO's part.
It really was a chess match, played out in the sky over Serbia with incredibly high stakes, life and death.
So Dani knew he couldn't compete on technology alone. What was his approach?
Well, faced with that overwhelming technological superiority, Dani understood raw power wasn't his strength. So instead, he bet on cunning, discipline, and really innovative ways of using the resources he did have. His tactics were all about survival and creating unexpected threats, turning weaknesses into advantages.
And mobility was central to that, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Absolutely fundamental. One of his foundational changes was making mobility a core doctrine for his SAM batteries. Traditionally, these S-125s were semi-stationary. They took a long time to set up and tear down.
How long are we talking?
Standard time was about 150 minutes. Dani spearheaded efforts to get that down, get them mobile. He managed to reduce the setup and takedown time to a truly remarkable 90 minutes.
Wow, cut it down significantly. How'd they do that?
Partly by simplifying procedures, streamlining everything, and even having the number of missile launchers per battery just to move faster. This shoot and scoop tactic, as you called it, was absolutely vital for survival.
Against those NATO planes, and especially the anti-radar missiles, the HARMs.
Exactly. Those missiles could pinpoint and destroy a static radar emitter incredibly quickly. So his crews practiced relentlessly. They knew their lives depended on every second saved during setup and teardown.
And then there was this famous 20-second rule. What was that about?
Right, the 20-second rule. To avoid becoming a target for those American HARM missiles, which home in on radar signals, Dani put in place this incredibly strict rule. His targeting radars could only be active for maximum 20 seconds.
Just 20 seconds. That's barely any time.
I know. Some sources even suggest it was tighter, maybe 17 seconds, or occasionally up to 40 in really desperate situations. But 17 to 20 seconds was the usual strict limit. After that brief period, the radar had to be switched off immediately, and the battery had to start moving, even if they hadn't fired.
Wow. The discipline required for that.
Immense pressure on the operators. But their training was incredibly rigorous. Detect, acquire, fire, all within that tiny window. Any delay meant almost certain destruction.
Okay, mobility, strict radar discipline.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, perhaps most surprisingly, intelligence was their secret weapon. The Serbian forces had a really effective intelligence network, much better than NATO seemed to realize.
How so? What kind of intelligence?
They used human intelligence. They actually had agents, observers on NATO air bases in Italy.
Seriously, on the bases?
Yep. Reporting on takeoffs, what types of aircraft were flying, and crucially, checking the status of those EA-6B Prowler electronic warfare planes. Were they on the ground? Were they flying?
That's huge. Knowing if the Prowlers were up would change everything for Dani's crews.
Absolutely invaluable.
Yeah.
If they knew a Prowler wasn't flying on a particular night, the risk of turning on their own radar dropped significantly. And then there was signals intelligence.
Intercepting communication.
Exactly. The Serbs were intercepting unencrypted NATO radio communications. By monitoring these channels, they could piece together flight routes, even get parts of NATO's air tasking orders.
Unencrypted comms, that sounds like another major NATO blunder.
It certainly played a part. It gave the Serbs an incredibly clear, almost predictive picture of NATO's flight plans and corridors. And finally, they used deception and camouflage extensively.
Like dummy targets?
Yeah, Dani's unit actively used dummy radars. Some were reportedly even made from scrap parts of old MiG fighters, just to draw HARM missile IO attacks away from the real systems and generally mislead NATO intelligence. They were playing this larger game of cat and mouse, constantly trying to chip away at NATO's perceived invulnerability.
Okay, so Serbian ingenuity was impressive, but this is where the story takes that critical turn, isn't it? Revealing how NATO's own mistakes basically handed Dani the opportunity on a silver platter.
Yeah, the Serbian tactics were brilliant, but they needed an opening, and NATO provided it.
And running through this whole narrative, almost like this invisible force, is the theme of arrogance, NATO's overconfidence.
Definitely. Especially in those initial phases of the air campaign. NATO planners were just absolutely convinced of their technological superiority. They largely dismissed Yugoslavia's air defenses as outdated, not a serious threat, assuming they'd be neutralized quickly.
And the F-117's perfect record in Iraq just fueled that belief, right? That it was totally invincible.
Completely. It fostered this almost unquestioning belief in its absolute invulnerability. And that mindset, unfortunately, led directly to some really critical operational errors.
And perhaps the biggest one, the most glaring tactical error stemming from this overconfidence, was the use of predictable flight paths.
It's still astonishing to think about. The F-117s, these super-secret stealth jets, were flying the exact same entry and exit routes into Serbian airspace, day after day.
You're hitting the same routes.
On the night Vega 31 was shot down, that specific route had been used for the third consecutive day. It's just a cardinal sin in combat aviation. It completely violates basic operational security.
Especially compared to Iraq, where you said they never repeated routes sequentially.
Exactly. That dangerous predictability was just an unearned gift to Dani. It allowed him to anticipate exactly where and when an F-117 might appear. He knew where to set up his ambush. He knew where to look.
Okay, predictable routes. What else?
The final critical piece of this puzzle was the missing prowlers. We touched on this. The bad weather on March 27th grounded those key electronic warfare aircraft, the EA-6B prowlers.
And their job was crucial for protecting the F-117s.
Absolutely vital. They jam enemy radars, provide that electronic shield. They emit powerful signals to overwhelm and confuse enemy systems, making it incredibly difficult for them to lock onto targets.
So without them,
the F-117s were effectively naked. The risk for Serbian air defense crews to turn on their radars dropped dramatically because the immediate threat of being zapped by a HARM missile was much lower. That gap in the electronic umbrella was the window of opportunity Dani was waiting for.
wow, so many things going wrong for NATO and right for Dani.
Yeah, what becomes really striking when you connect all these pieces is how these errors didn't just happen in isolation, they converged. They created the perfect storm for Dani's unit.
The routes told him where to be.
Exactly. The predictable routes told him where to set up his mobile SAM battery. His intelligence network, both the spies on the ground and the intercepted signals, confirmed that the crucial prowlers weren't flying.
Which lowered the risk of turning on the radar.
Significantly lowered the immediate threat from HARMs. And that lack of threat gave Dani the sheer audacity, the courage, to break his own strict 20-second rule.
Kept the radar on longer.
He ordered a third radar activation, even after the first two attempts hadn't found anything, and it forced him to move his battery each time. It was in that extended, much riskier third activation period that the F-117 was finally detected and eliminated.
That's incredible nerve.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the whole incident is just a classic illustration of that military saying, the enemy also has a vote. No matter how superior your tech, how good your intel, how weak the other guy seems, they always have the potential to do something unexpected. And in this case, something profoundly adaptive.
It really highlights Dani's understanding. He knew the F-117 was less visible, not truly invisible.
And he leveraged every single possible advantage, tactical discipline, mobility, intelligence, NATO's mistakes, to exploit that critical distinction.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts here because this is where it gets really fascinating. How could this old Soviet system, 1960s tech, possibly defeat the most advanced stealth jet of its time? It wasn't magic, right?
No, definitely not magic, not some improbable coincidence either. It was really a testament to applied science, understanding the fundamental physics involved, and exploiting some very specific vulnerabilities. Let's break down the science of how they actually did it.
All right, so the F-117's stealth. What made it stealthy?
Well, its stealth tech was undeniably revolutionary for the time. The core idea isn't making the plane totally invisible like in sci-fi. It's about minimizing its visibility to radar.
How did it do that? That weird shape.
Exactly. That iconic faceted shape, made up of lots of flat panels, was specifically designed to reflect incoming radar waves away from the radar's receiver, instead of bouncing them straight back, like angling a mirror so the light doesn't hit you in the eyes.
And that design came from?
Interestingly, it was based on theoretical work done way back in the 1960s by a Soviet physicist, Petr Ufimtsev. His math showed how to predict radar reflections from complex shapes.
A Soviet physicist's work helped build America's top stealth jet.
Wow.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? And that shape was combined with special radio-absorbing materials, RAM, coating the fuselage. All this drastically reduced its radar cross-section, or RCS.
RCS, that's basically how big it looks on radar.
Yeah, in simple terms, it's a measure of how bright or large an object appears on a radar screen. The F-117 was designed to have an RCS maybe comparable to a bird, even smaller from some angles, instead of a large aircraft.
But here's the key point you mentioned earlier. It wasn't equally stealthy against all types of radar.
That is the absolutely crucial point. The F-117's design, the shape, the RAM coatings, they were primarily optimized to counter high-frequency radars.
High frequency, meaning short wavelengths, like X-band radar.
Exactly. Those are the kinds typically used in modern missile guidance and fire control systems because they give you high resolution, needed for precise targeting. The F-117 was never truly invisible to all radar types.
And this is where Dani's old radar comes in. The S-125 system itself wasn't the primary detection tool, was it? It was something else.
Right. The key to initially detecting the F-117 lay with a different, seemingly obsolete radar system that NATO hadn't really considered a major threat in this context. Dani's unit used a P-18 radar, NATO codenamed Spoon Rest, for initial long-range detection.
P-18 Spoon Rest. And what was special about that one?
The critical thing is that it operates on long waves, specifically in the very high frequency, or VHF, band. Much longer wavelengths than the X-band radars the F-117 was designed to defeat.
Okay, so long waves versus short waves. Why did that matter against the F-117?
It matters because of a physics phenomenon called resonance. It's kind of related to something called Rayleigh scattering, when the wavelength is similar in size to the object. Think about it like this. Imagine hitting a drum.
Okay.
If you hit it with a tiny pebble, not much happens. If you hit it with a huge blanket, it muffles it. But if you hit it with a drumstick that's just the right size and shape, the drum head vibrates intensely, makes a loud sound, it resonates.
Right.
Similarly, when a radar's wavelength is comparable in size to specific parts of an aircraft, like its tail fins or the wingspan, maybe even internal structures, the radar energy doesn't just bounce off the surface smoothly. Instead, it causes these parts to resonate.
Like a tuning fork.
It's like a tuning fork. This resonance makes the aircraft's structure re-radiate that radar energy in all directions. And that creates a much stronger radar return, a much brighter blip than you'd expect based just on the plane's shape and RAM.
So the F-117's design, optimized for short waves, actually made it more vulnerable to these long waves from the old P-18.
Ironically, yes. In that specific frequency band, its stealth features were less effective. However, there's a catch. While the P-18 could mark the F-117's presence, basically tell Dani, hey, there's something stealthy out there in that general direction. Finding the needle in the haystack, it had very low resolution.
Meaning
it couldn't provide the precise targeting data needed to actually guide a missile. It could tell them something was there, maybe roughly where, but not exactly where to aim.
Okay, so the long-wave P-18 radar could only give a general mark, a hint. How did Dani's team go from that fuzzy detection to a precise missile-launching hit on Zelko's plane? This is the final piece, isn't it?
This is the critical final puzzle piece, and it came down to a routine action by the pilot himself, a necessary step in his mission. The absolute culminating moment was when Dale Zelko opened his bomb bay doors.
To drop his bombs.
Exactly, to release his 2 laser-guided paveway bombs. This action is widely cited by analysts, and even by Dani himself, as the critical point of vulnerability.
Why? What happened when the doors opened?
Well, when those doors opened, the internal structure of the weapon, bay, the bomb racks, the mechanisms, plus the flat inner surfaces of the open doors themselves, they acted like perfect radar reflectors, much less stealthy than the exterior skin.
So it suddenly became much more visible to radar.
For a brief moment, yes. It caused the F-117's carefully minimized radar cross-section to temporarily but significantly blossom or spike in size. Its visibility increased dramatically, maybe by several orders of magnitude. Imagine a tiny, almost invisible speck suddenly flaring up like a small flashlight in the darkness.
Just for a few seconds while the doors were open.
Exactly. But that brief surge in visibility was all it took. It was enough for the high-frequency targeting radar of the S-125 system the radar actually used for guiding the missiles to acquire a confident lock on the target.
And this happened within that tight 17 to 20 second window they had?
Precisely. Within that critical window that Dani's crew had trained so rigorously for.
Yeah.
Once they had that solid lock, boom, the S-125 launched 2 missiles. The engagement distance was somewhere between 13 and 23 kilometers based on various accounts.
So it was a 2-stage process.
Exactly. A precise 2-stage process. First, the long-wave P-18 radar provided the initial broad detection finding the needle. Then the act of the bomb bay opening created that momentary but critical window of vulnerability. That allowed the high-frequency targeting radar of the S-125 to get a precise lock and actually hit that needle.
So it wasn't one miracle weapon, it was a system.
A systemic, integrated approach. combining an old search radar, a slightly newer but still outdated targeting radar, incredibly disciplined tactics, timely intelligence, exploiting NATO's mistakes, and leveraging a fundamental vulnerability in the physics of the F-117's stealth design. All those pieces had to come together.
Okay, let's step back from the tech for a moment.
Yeah.
Because beyond the tactics and the physics, there's this harrowing human drama unfolding. The shock of the attack, the desperate ejection, those terrifying hours trying to survive on the ground, and then this daring rescue. Let's bring it back to Dale Zelko in the cockpit.
Yeah, absolutely. Zelko himself described seeing 2 missiles burst through the thick clouds below him, streaking right towards his aircraft.
2 of them.
2. The first one screamed past so close it violently shook his F-117. Just the shockwave. But thankfully it didn't detonate. The second one, however, it detonated nearby. Its proximity fuse worked perfectly, unleashing thousands of deadly metal fragments.
And the impact.
Brutal and immediate. Zelko said he experienced intense negative G-forces, estimated later at maybe up to 7 Gs, which literally pulled him upwards out of his seat towards the cockpit canopy.
Pulled him out of his seat.
Yeah, fighting against his harness. He fought instinctively just to get back down, assume the correct posture for ejection, knowing any mistake could mean severe injury or worse. The force was so intense, he actually doesn't even remember pulling the ejection handles.
He just blacked out.
Not quite blacked out, but it was chaos. He only remembers the canopy suddenly separating with his huge roar and falling away into the darkness below. The entire ejection sequence, from initiation to the parachute fully deploying, takes only about 1.4 seconds. But he said it felt like an eternity. A slow-motion blur of violence and instinct. But here's a truly remarkable detail, showing his professional mindset even then. While he was descending rapidly under his parachute, looking down at the burning wreckage, he actually imagined congratulating the Serbian operator who'd made the shot. He thought to himself, great shot.
Wow. Even in that moment.
Even in that moment. A true testament to his pilot's spirit, his training, and just incredible composure under literally unimaginable pressure.
And that composure, that quick thinking, probably saved him during the next 8 hours, right? His time on the ground, deep behind enemy lines.
Very likely, yes. While he was still descending under his parachute, Zelko made a really high-stakes decision. One that actually went directly against established protocol for downed pilots.
What did he do?
He decided to use his emergency survival radio to transmit a distress signal while he was still relatively high up.
Why was that against protocol? Risk of detection.
Exactly. Protocol was usually to wait until you were on the ground and hidden before transmitting, to minimize the chance of the enemy pinpointing your location from the signal.
Yeah.
But Zelko reasoned correctly, as it turned out that transmitting from altitude would maximize his signal range, give him a much better chance of being heard by friendly rescue forces far away.
A calculated risk.
A huge, calculated risk, taken in a moment of extreme duress. And that quick, unconventional thinking likely saved his life. He eventually landed in this desolate, muddy field near a town called Ruma, about a mile or so from where his plane had crashed.
And he found cover quickly.
Yeah, he immediately found crucial cover in a drainage ditch he'd actually spotted while he was still descending. He buried himself in the mud and vegetation there. And the Yugoslav forces, they wasted no time. They launched an intense search operation right away. Soldiers, local police, even tracker dogs.
How close did they get?
Chillingly close. At one point, search parties with dogs passed within just a few hundred meters of his hiding spot. He could hear their voices, hear the dogs barking. And while lying there, cold and wet in the ditch, he could actually feel the ground shake from NATO bombs hitting other targets nearby.
Oh my God, that's surreal. Bombs from his own side falling nearby while he's hiding from the enemy.
Just a terrifying, surreal experience, underscoring how incredibly precarious his situation was. Meanwhile, back at NATO command, as soon as they realized Vega 31 was down, a massive combat search and rescue CSAR operation was immediately spun up. This really demonstrated that deep military commitment. No one left behind. Recovering downed aviators is a top priority, no matter the risk.
What kind of assets did they send in?
It was a formidable force, specifically tailored for this kind of dangerous, deep penetration rescue. Included 2 big Sikorsky MH-53 Pave-Low helicopters and 1 Sikorsky HH-60 Pave-Hawk. These are heavy-lift, long-range birds designed for exactly this.
And they didn't go in alone, I assume?
No way. They were heavily escorted and protected by multiple A-10 Warhawk aircraft. The Sandy call sign tradition. Their job is basically to sanitize the rescue zone, provide devastating close air support to suppress any enemy ground fire threatening the helicopters.
Like flying tanks, clearing the path.
Pretty much. And coordinating everything from high above was an E-3 AWACS aircraft, managing the airspace, directing assets, monitoring threats. It was a complex, high-stakes operation.
And they got him?
They did, after about 8 agonizing hours for Zelko on the ground. Just as dawn was breaking early on March 28th, the helicopter team swooped in with incredible precision, picked him up, and got out of there fast. Reports later suggested he was rescued literally minutes before Serbian ground forces would have captured him.
Wow, cutting it incredibly close.
Incredibly close. And again, Zelko's crucial decision to break protocol, use his radio early from altitude. It demonstrates the importance of flexible thinking, making those tough command decisions in critical moments. He correctly judged that getting the word out early outweighed the risk of detection, and it ultimately led to his miraculous rescue.
So the downing of the F-117, it clearly wasn't just a one-off event with only immediate consequences. It cast a really long shadow, didn't it? Across the military world, impacting doctrine, strategy, even geopolitics for years to come. What does it all mean looking back?
Well, one of the most significant long-term revelations, something that fundamentally alters the historical assessment, is the fact that they didn't just shoot down one F-117. They damaged a second one. Severely.
A second F-117. I thought that was just a rumor for a long time.
It was considered a persistent rumor, yeah. A whisper in military circles. But it has now been definitively confirmed by a pilot who was actually there.
Who confirmed it?
The confirmation came from retired F-117 pilot Charlie Tuna Heinlein, speaking on the Afterburn podcast. It's a credible first-hand account.
When did this happen? Also in March 99?
No, this incident reportedly occurred on a mission after the first shootdown. Unconfirmed sources often point to April 30th, 1999. Heinlein was flying in a two-ship formation based out of Spangdahlem in Germany at the time.
What did he see?
Over Belgrade, he witnessed this huge missile. He described it as looking like a Saturn V streak up towards his wingman's position. After the attack, he lost radio contact with his wingman, and the other F-117 didn't show up at their planned refueling point.
Oh no, he thought it was lost.
For a time, yes. But after some agonizing waiting, the damaged F-117 eventually limped into view. It was flying without lights, really struggling to maintain speed, and Heinlein could see it was visibly leaking fuel during the emergency aerial refueling. He actually helped guide the badly damaged aircraft back to base.
Did it fly again?
Apparently not. It was reportedly so severely damaged that it never flew again. Essentially a write-off.
That completely changes the narrative.
It changes everything. It confirms that Dani's tactics, his unit's methods, they weren't a fluke, not just a single lucky shot against Zelko. It was a reproducible method for successfully engaging these first-generation stealth aircraft, at least under specific conditions. It proves they had found a consistent way to counter this vaunted technology, given the right circumstances and that incredible tactical discipline.
And the physical evidence from Zelko's plane, something wicked. What happened to the wreckage?
The Serbian military meticulously collected as much of it as they could. Key parts you can see: the cockpit canopy, the ejection seat, a large fragment of the wing with the U.S. Air Force star on it. They're now proudly displayed in the Aeronautical Museum in Belgrade.
A war trophy.
Absolutely. It became a powerful symbol of national pride for Serbia, a tangible testament to this unexpected victory against a technologically vastly superior adversary. But this also raises a really important question for military strategists, especially on the U.S. side. What was the true cost of the handling of that wreckage?
Meaning
The United States made absolutely no attempt to bomb the crash site, to destroy the wreckage and the sensitive stealth technology contained within it.
Why not? That seems like standard procedure.
Well, some U.S. officials at the time publicly downplayed the risk. They argued, that the F-117's core technology was mostly from the 1970s, so it was already somewhat dated. But looking back, this appears to have been a severe intelligence failure with really profound long-term consequences.
Because the wreckage didn't stay in Serbia.
It's now widely reported, almost universally accepted in defense analysis circles, that key components of the wreckage were transferred to and extensively studied by both Russia and China.
Giving them a first-hand look at U.S. stealth tech.
Invaluable intelligence. It allowed them to examine everything: the radar-absorbent materials, the specific angles and facets of the structural design that contributed to its low observability. It's highly probable, almost certain really, that access to this wreckage significantly accelerated the development of their own stealth aircraft programs.
Like the Chinese J-20 and the Russian Su-57.
Exactly. So you see how a single tactical incident in 1999 ended up having these far-reaching geopolitical consequences, influencing the balance of air power and aircraft design well into the 21st century.
So bringing it all together, what are the big takeaways? The enduring lessons from the fall of the Nighthawk that still resonate today in military thinking?
There are several really profound ones. First, and maybe most obviously, the myth was shattered. The F-117's downing definitively destroyed that long-held belief in absolute stealth and vulnerability. No technology, no matter how advanced, is a magic bullet. It was a harsh reminder that no system is truly impregnable. Every advantage has a counter.
Second lesson.
Second, it starkly highlighted the danger of overconfidence. This whole episode serves as a powerful warning about the perils of arrogance, of underestimating your adversary, and critically, of using predictable tactics. Like we discussed, the enemy always gets a vote, and ignoring their potential ingenuity comes at a very severe price.
And it validated counter-stealth ideas.
Absolutely. Third, it provided crucial counter-stealth validation. It confirmed theories that had been around about how to combat stealth, especially the effectiveness of using those low-frequency, long-wave radars like the P-18. This incident spurred significant global investment in developing counter-stealth technologies and tactics. Militaries worldwide started pouring resources into things like multispectral sensor fusion, networked air defenses, new radar types.
Yeah. And finally,
and this is always crucial, it underscored the absolute paramount importance of operational security OPSEC. The combination of those compromised communications channels NATO was apparently using and the effectiveness of Serbian human intelligence on the ground. It gave Dani's forces a decisive edge. The smallest crack in security, the slightest predictable pattern can become a gaping vulnerability that a skilled and determined adversary will exploit. It was a massive wake-up call for military planners everywhere, and its echoes are still felt today.
So we started this deep dive talking about high-tech warfare, complex tactics, cutting-edge technology that ultimately failed that night. We explored the physics, the ingenuity on the ground, the pilot's harrowing experience. But the ultimate conclusion to this story, it's something else entirely. It's deeply human, profoundly unexpected. A story of peace, forgiveness, and just common humanity that kind of transcends all that military stuff.
It really does. What's truly astonishing here, the most captivating part of this entire narrative for me, is what happened years after the war. The pilot, Dale Zelko, and the commander who ordered the missiles fired, Zoltán Dani, they began corresponding.
The pilot and the guy who shot him down, how did that even start?
It wasn't immediate. Apparently, it was Dani's son who convinced his father that he should try and reach out to the American pilot he'd shot down, help him make contact.
Wow, and Zelko's reaction?
Zelko, when he eventually received the letter, he later said he became obsessed with the idea of meeting the man who had tried to kill him. Eventually they did. They met in person.
Unbelievable.
Their first encounter was, as blips on a radar screen. A fleeting, deadly contact in a war. Their second encounter was face-to-face as friends.
Is this documented somewhere?
Beautifully captured, actually. In a documentary film by director Ilsko Merkovic, it's aptly titled The Second Meeting. The film chronicles their incredible emotional journey from being bitter adversaries on opposite sides of a conflict to becoming genuine friends. It explores these profound themes of reconciliation, understanding, the power of human connection that can bridge even the deepest divides.
I need to see that film.
It's incredibly powerful. And zooming out again, this story, their story, it transcends just military analysis. It offers a really potent message for all of us, for the whole world, really. Dale Zelko himself articulated how this unlikely friendship fundamentally changed his whole worldview, challenged his ingrained ideas about conflict, about the enemy.
What did he say?
He said, and I'm quoting him directly here, "If only there was a way for all groups of the world to meet and get to know each other, the way Zoltan and I did, how could we ever go to war again?"
Wow, that's profound.
It carries immense weight, doesn't it? And then, at the film's premiere in Belgrade, someone asked him if he could ever fly a combat mission against Serbia again, now that he was friends with Dani. His response was immediate, cut right through everything. Absolutely no, it would be impossible. You no longer can take the human factor out of it.
You can't dehumanize the enemy once you know them.
Exactly. And this just raises that incredibly important question for all of us, doesn't it? What if every conflict, every lingering animosity could somehow end with a meeting like that? With that kind of face-to-face understanding between former enemies? What would that mean for the world?
It's a powerful thought.
It truly is. A story that began with an explosion in the night sky, a moment of conflict and technological failure, ended with the embrace of two families. A powerful symbol of hope. is a story of how a pilot and a missile man, former enemies, became friends and proved, pretty unequivocally I think, that our shared humanity is ultimately stronger than any ideology, any animosity, any technological divide.
An incredible story from beginning to end. Thank you for being with us on this journey. This was a deep dive into the fall of Nighthawk.